So I want to talk about group dynamics in group supervision. So this is part one of a set of two sets of slides. So this one's going to look at the theory of Wilfred Bion and how he looked at groups and to a degree what the implications are for supervision. And then the second, which is focused on leadership, talks more about how that theory is then applied within group supervision. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So let's look at just a couple of basic principles in psychodynamics as they apply to groups. So we do assume that early life plays a major part in shaping how the mind organises itself. And that is shaped then on a daily basis by fantasy and imagination as well as by real life experience. And that gives us meaning in our lives. So we have two main tasks in life: to love and to work. Within the group itself, the public nature of the group means that we do have the opportunity to observe and learn from each other. And as well, the individual is exposed to that observation of others, to their view of him. So often people can see things about us before we see it ourselves. And of course, we also see things about other people before they may see it themselves. And there's a continuous toing and froing between the sort of powerful personal wishes and needs of the individual and the basic demands of the group. So then Bion was interested in what happened when groups became kind of irrational, unproductive, fragmented. Now bear in mind, Bion was a First World War hero actually, and then also played a part in the Second World War and was working from army bases. So he's quite informed by the sort of groups in those situations. And then he went into the Tavistock subsequent to the war, the Second World War. But anyway, he posited that the group shared some unconscious assumptions about what they were there to do and be, as well as the conscious task. So the unconscious assumptions were not shared, but they were powerful and they could sabotage the group. And these kind of unconscious emotions were a way of the group coping with the uncertainty and anxiety that groups generally create, and how to manage oneself in that. So Bion then posits that there are two groups going on simultaneously. We've got the work group that's focused on the overt task, such as the building of the aeroplane, or if we're in the NHS, the looking after of the patient. And then there's the basic assumption group. And there is a reason why my hands are going in opposite directions there, because the basic assumptions group is not really interested in the task. It's the unconscious. What it cares about is security versus anxiety, self-preservation, possible avoidance of task. Do I belong here? Do I feel separate? You know, all those sorts of things are going on in the collective mind of the group. So you've got that sort of agenda going on underneath the work group. Why? It's all about anxiety and avoidance of anxiety, and what humans being and the lengths human beings go to avoid that anxiety. So most people are aware of the sort of classic three main group positions that Bion posited then. First of all, the basic assumption of dependency. The idea that the unconscious is around seeking security and protection from one individual. Usually the designated leader of the group, which might be the tutor if you're running an experiential group, or the lead group supervisor, or the manager if one is in the workplace. So if this all-powerful leader doesn't perform up to scratch, then the leader may be attacked and a replacement sought. So there you have a cycle of idealization and then denigration going on, with leaders getting sacked and then new ones coming in. You can look at examples also countrywide, like dictatorships or the church, you know, so organizations that are sort of built around one individual, in the case of the church, and in the case of countries, they find it extremely hard, you know, if they've had dictatorships for a long time, to actually move into a different kind of position. Then you've got your second basic assumption, fight flight. So here it's around self-preservation, the underlying theme. And the group may get into fights, it may get into scapegoating, it may get into attacking. And leadership is generally given to anyone who can mobilize the aggressive forces of the group and help it to move away from the task. So examples here are potentially the army. In that sense, I mean, that would dovetail nicely in with the overt purpose of the group, of course. But there may be other situations where the actual purpose is to, in the unconscious mind of the group, is to get away from the task by just getting locked into fight and flight and basically not building the plane or not looking after the patient. In the case of Lucy Letby, for example, when you sort of read around it a bit, you could see that the nurses versus the doctors versus the management, there was quite a lot of infighting going on there. And as a result of that, you know, Lucy Letby was allowed really to get away with what happened for longer than should have been the case. So then you've got your third pairing, basic assumption focused around pairing and the kind of miraculous dream of the group, really, hoping that two people will produce some miraculous outcome, i.e. the idea of the baby, the saviour, that will rescue the group. So in the meantime, the group are kind of frozen and waits for the miracle. So what happens there overtly is that not a lot is getting done whilst the group is waiting for the miracle to happen. So in terms of what do the groups look like when they're working well and not working so well, as it were, although probably those are judgmental terms to use. I mean, all of these things happen in groups. Groups are not perfect, and we'll slip in and out of being a sort of work-focused group and a basic assumptions group at various times in various teams. You know, no group or team is perfect over a sustained period of time, you know, and it's just natural. So when a group works well, people are clear about the purpose, everyone feels they have a role to play, there's a united feel, the group's productive, it's open to healthy external influences, they can accept difference, everybody feels valued and playing their part, and the group can acknowledge failure and learn from it. Whereas in the basic assumption group, there tends to be a lot of bickering going on, probably not a lot of productivity, quite a lot of tension, perhaps struggle to accept difference, maybe struggle to accept outside help and just influence again. So it's kind of very inwardly focused. So I'm sure we've all got memories of being in teams where they've definitely slipped into that, and then other times, you know, slipped out of that and into a sort of more productive phase. So it's not about being sort of right or wrong there, but just about feeling, well, what's happening in this group to make it slip into a place that's perhaps a more anxious and less productive place? What's going on? That's the thing to think about. So then I think we need to just touch into two other main features of this kind of group. So Bion talked about valency, people having a valency to get cross, get anxious, get sad in groups, and normally for each one of us it kind of relates to the sort of role we tend to assume in groups. And of course, where does that come from? In psychodynamics, of course, we would say it comes from your first experiences in your family, and what role you may have been thrust into as a child. So the role may feel natural or unnatural in relation to your personality, or somewhere in between the two. So what happens is you might have a member of the group who gets to first base about being cross, whereas somebody else is quite slow to get cross, but they might be quite quick to get upset or tearful. Somebody else may be quick to get quite anxious, and somebody else may be quick to jolly people along. So everybody has a bit of valency, a role that you tend to slip into almost without thinking about it. So when it's working effectively, that can be quite helpful for groups. But again, if it becomes inflexible, that becomes problematic. So let's see how this relates to projection now on our next slide. So projection is something that's very well known. It's something that happens in all groups. It happens between individuals. It can happen anywhere. And all it's about really is that, for example, if I'm slow to sadness, but might be quite quick to anger, somebody else who has ease displaying their feelings of sadness in a group, I might feel a bit irritated with. And the stronger I've probably repressed my own sadness, perhaps the more irritated I feel. So I'm not sad, you're the one who's sad, and I wish you'd shut up. Okay, so that's a kind of an idea of projection. Or sometimes you have somebody saying to me, "Go, you're angry." You think, hang on, I'm not angry, but the person themselves is angry. So we can be projected into various roles, and depending on what happens next, some people can sort of own that role. That's called projective identification, when a role's been thrust upon them and then you kind of accept it and almost swallow it whole. But with projection and valency, working in a group together, what happens is, say, if I've got the valency to be cross, and the group's quite happy for me to get to first base and take on all the fights that the group needs to have, then I'm kind of stuck in that role. I have a valency for it, and I've kind of got stuck in it now, and I'm seen as the one who's going to do the fighting for the group, and they will thrust me into that situation. And likewise with the sad person in the group, the person who has the valency finds most ease in expressing that, may begin to express the sad feelings on behalf of the group. Again, they get stuck with the tears. All right, so flexible groups need to distribute the emotion a little bit more democratically. Let's have a look at that. So then the issue becomes, with projection and valency, you can see that it's quite a powerful combination, and that the group can, on one level, it could work very well and get some certain tasks done very quickly for a group. But on another level, if the group gets too stuck into, let's say they pick the cross member and they're in complete denial of their own anger, then that's when a group can become very one-dimensional, and the task of the leader is to invite the group to re-own the feelings that they're in at least partial denial of, like what are individuals cross about, other than Amelia, who's taking that role for the group. What are other people cross about? Let's have a listen to that and sort of dredge up some of those feelings. And on the other hand, Amelia, you seem to be kind of quite eager to take responsibility in these certain areas. You think there might be, is that the role that you want in the group? Would you like to extend your repertoire and think about, moving into other areas that you might not have explored yourself. So, for example, exploring your own sadness or something that you might feel unhappy about or joyful about even. So in that way, trying to tease a person out of their role that they've tended to get a bit stuck with and slightly entrapped by, and likewise get the group itself out of the trap of denial. So I think you might want to consider what kind of roles you have a valency for. What ones can you tend to slip into? Look at your family, look at your team, look at your past. And are you happy about that? Could it be sometimes that you do feel a bit resentful about that? In marriages, people can get very stuck into certain roles, and then it's fine for the first few years, but then begin to feel a bit resentful and want a bit more flexibility. So have a good think about that, and think about how they may relate to the past in terms of what kinds of things were permitted and what weren't, and understand and have some self-compassion for why you have been slow to look at some areas, because they very simply perhaps were not permitted when you were small. So let's, in our next slides, we're now going to move on to implications and explore leadership implications in more detail.